Well, most thought it would at least be close, but it wasn't. Penn State came in as the favorite in this college football playoff matchup against SMU, favored by a little more than a touchdown, between 8 and 9 points, roughly, depending on the sports book. They ended up winning by 28. Final score: Penn State 38, SMU 10. The first playoff game Penn State has ever played, and the first one played between any pair of teams in Beaver Stadium. Jarrod Prugar joining me as usual from Nittany Sports Now, and we have a special guest, Mike Asti from West Virginia Sports Now, our sister outlet. He covered Penn State WVU week 1, and it was a lot warmer in Morgantown that day than it was in Happy Valley today. But guys, it was a very, I would call it a bizarre football game, 2 pick sixes. It hadn't been done by any Penn State defense since 1998, and there's been a lot of good defensive units at Penn State since then. That's what happened today, and both linebackers, which makes it even more unusual. DeLuca getting one to set the tone, and Tony Rojas getting one a little later on. That's really the story, I think, is the 3 interceptions of a very good quarterback in Kevin Jennings, and 2 of them going for touchdowns, and the third one setting up another touchdown. By then it was 21-0, and SMU just didn't have the horses, no pun intended.
Very well done, Joe.
Maybe a pun intended.
Yeah, maybe.
Now, it was a little less wet than the WVU game with Mike before.
Yeah.
But the thing with Kevin Jennings was that he was uncomfortable the entire game. The defensive front 7 was out of their minds. And they had, I think, 11 tackles for loss, ended up with 3 sacks. Abdul Carter was a monster, and it doesn't really show up on the stat sheet, mainly because he's getting held 9 times out of 10. But his sack did come as he was being held. Of course, it wasn't called. But again, the defense played very, very well, and defense this time of year is going to get you where you need to go. The offense kind of sputtered. Everybody wasn't really sure what they were expecting from SMU with their schedule. We saw Indiana get bounced by Notre Dame. They had a weak schedule as well. But SMU came in, and their offense put them in a 14-0 hole when they need to be putting points on the board. And for Penn State, then it's time to feast.
Yeah, and it's not that this game leaves you, if you're a Penn State fan, thinking everything's roses and everything's perfect, because they did us a little slow start on offense, 20 yards by Aller in that first quarter. But they were able to take advantage of SMU mistakes. This game unfolded, certainly the start of this game, the worst way possible for SMU that you mentioned, and Penn State capitalized. So they often say to win a championship, you have to be as lucky as you are good. Penn State showed they're really good, but also got a little lucky with mistakes by a quarterback who usually doesn't make these kinds of mistakes. And they also took advantage. You got to capitalize. So not only did they get the picks, they ended up with 2 pick sixes. One of them, you got to avoid a few tackles to get all the way down there. And then another one after SMU finally stole some momentum with the stop. That was really the only time all game they had momentum and the sideline was pumped up. And then Penn State flips it right back. So Penn State obviously has to be happy with this victory. You also get the monkey off the back of Franklin Dreauer a little bit, because you can argue the past about whether USC is really a big win since they had a really down year. You can argue Illinois being their only ranked win, and maybe they puttered that away a little bit in terms of prestige of the victory. This is a playoff win. Like, this has to be a big win for the program and for Franklin and for Aller. So,
and it's not been done ever in the program. He wins his 100th game. Yep. This is the first time they made it to the playoff in the expanded format.
Right.
He finally wins a playoff game in his first drive, which is huge. And there's still a lot of work to be done.
100%.
Penn State looks pretty good going forward in the Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah, and I also think this solidifies what James Franklin's been saying for literally a decade now, that I get maybe, we weren't one of the 4 best teams, Franklin could argue. Maybe they were in some of those years. But there's data to show that if you expanded it to 12 in that decade, they would have been in 6 times, I believe. And now you get in when it is a 12-team playoff. And he always said, you expand it, we're going to be in, I guarantee it, and we're going to show up. So they expanded it. He got in. He did it without a conference title. They got to be happy with the result without even winning a conference title. And he showed up and got a victory. So there's things to work on. And Kodo Nicky even talked about it. You got to be concerned about the offense a little bit for a slow start. Not every team's going to hand you 14 points right off the bat. But not every time a quarterback plays like that is every team going to take advantage. Is every team going to put those points on the board? And you certainly maybe feel even better about winning in the postseason in any sport when your defense really shows up than even your offense. Because when it's cold, when it's this kind of weather, even though it'll be a lot warmer in Arizona, you want the defense to show up. So they took advantage of being at home. They took advantage of the defense showing up. They took advantage of being the better team. And nobody's sitting around saying Penn State doesn't deserve to be here. And that is the conversation around SMU right now.
James Franklin getting win number 100 at Penn State. He got his 100th overall win 2 Novembers ago at Rutgers, but he is now 309 wins short of the program record. I don't know if he's going to get there, but Penn State fans are definitely happy he got one today. Jarrod, I wasn't part of the beat yet when Dom DeLuca was getting recruited by Penn State, so I'm not as familiar with his story, at least from a first-hand coverage standpoint, but he was the big story of today's game for the defense. And going into this week, if you had to poll people on who's going to be the starter for Penn State defensively, most people probably would have said Abdul Carter. You would have gotten some votes for Dennis Sutton, some for Jalen Reed, maybe a few for Zane Durant. I don't think Dom DeLuca would have gotten a very, very much consideration there. But we talked about earlier in the week how unfortunate it was that a PA guy in Bo Prabula, whatever you want to say, it was screwed by the system, just unfortunate. He was in the transfer portal and was not able to be with his team during this college football playoff run. DeLuca is kind of the opposite. This is a feel-good story for a PA guy who battled injuries, who fought through all the difficulties of being a walk-on, got a scholarship, and not only is holding his own, but he was the man for Penn State defensively today.
Yeah, I mean, he had a half sack, the 2 picks. So obviously, the pick 6 was huge and exactly what Penn State needed. But he's been that guy, and James Franklin alluded to it in the press conference. There might not be very many of those stories ever anymore with the way that the rosters are going to be distributed and scholarships and all that stuff. But it just goes to show you, if you bide your time and you do the right things and trust the process, if you will, that good things are typically going to happen, unless you're the Philadelphia 76ers. But that's a story.
Didn't work out for them.
For another show.
Right.
But again, for DeLuca, he's done everything. He's a captain. He earned a scholarship. And that's what you want. You want guys to come in, earn it, and it shows every day when he steps on the field. He was even hurt, obviously, earlier in the year and missed a game or two. So, I mean, it's just one of those situations where for Dom DeLuca to come out and put on a performance in what is probably going to be his last game here at Beaver Stadium, it's such a special occasion. And it just adds the icing to the cake of the victory. And at the same time, you look at guys, people are going to game plan against Abdul Carter and Zane Durant and neutralize them. And it's not easy to do. But guys like Dom DeLuca and Tony Rojas are going to have to step up and do their jobs at linebacker. And they did that today.
Yeah, you have to step up in that situation because the meetings for the opponent leading up to the week, multiple meetings is how to neutralize Abdul Carter. Yep. They're not probably scheming for Dom, but somebody else is going to have to step up in those scenarios because if you do neutralize Abdul Carter, you can't just pack it in and say, we lost the scheme meeting, so we're done the rest of the game. Somebody else is going to have to step up. That's why you have a team that is vying for a championship. But yeah, not many athletes trust the process these days, and sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. But to have one that did trust and bide his time and had success and then steps up in a moment like this, no matter what happens the rest of this postseason or the rest of Penn State football history, he's etched forever in the first playoff win here ever in their first appearance in this playoff, and he is the star of that game. That's never going away no matter what happens in the future.
First touchdown, first interception return for a touchdown. The list can go on and on.
You're going to hear his name on the PA 20 years from now about what happens in another playoff game. He'll be the first to do.
He's now the answer to multiple trivia questions.
Right.
And for Penn State to come out and get this win on a day where the offense wasn't overly impressive, now, is great. But offensively speaking, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen carried the ball load 90 and 70 yards respectively.
6.4 yards per carry.
So they did show up more than maybe people would give them credit.
Right, and they did. And James Franklin, again, alluded to this in the press conference. They ran 2 passes in the third quarter and 2 passes in the fourth quarter. 4 total pass plays in the fourth quarter. And that's, I think, Joe, why you mentioned it was a very weird game. And you and I talked in the press box about this. It was such a weird game because there was no flow, really, thanks to Penn State's defense being on the field what seemed like an awful lot at the beginning of the game because touchdown, Penn State's defense back on the
That's
field.
what happens.
Interception again, and when you have that type of dynamic, it's really weird. But again, Penn State came out, got the win, and now they're going to be facing my beloved Boise State Broncos in Arizona.
Well, they know the scheme to go against them. They're going to try to run the football.
Yep.
Right.
So I can scheme that. We'll see what they do against them.
Yeah, and it really is the sign of how much Penn State football has changed in 3 short years, because in 2021, Penn State did not have a single 100-yard rusher in 13 games. And now neither Nicholas Singleton or Katron Allen quite got to 100 yards, as Jarrod mentioned. Singleton had 90, Allen had 70. But for Penn State to really do whatever they wanted against the number 4 ranked rush defense on the country on the ground, and for people really to not notice that too much. I don't think there's been too much talk about, Penn State's running game is amazing. This is great. I think it's come to be expected, not just of the running game, but of the offensive line, because both the running game and the offensive line were really they had a lot of not very nice things said about them going back to just 3 years ago. So.
And there was more talk about that last year. All the conversation last year was Penn State's going to do it on the ground, or maybe Aller's not good enough on his own to lead the team. It got to be on the ground. And this Penn State team obviously is still being led on the ground offensively, but Aller stepped up a lot more this year. Andy Konicki's made this offense different. He's made it more explosive. He's added much more to the passing game. And just because Drew Aller didn't throw up 300-plus yards in this game and 4 TDs and be perfect in this game doesn't mean he can't in a playoff game either, because this game didn't call for it. When you have 14 points off pick sixes, it does change things up play-wise and scheme-wise. So this is just a different offensive team than a year ago. I don't know how else to explain it.
And it starts up front. I think Phil Troutwine's done an incredible job up front. That's always been the knock. The offensive line coach has not always been the greatest position for the Penn State offense. Obviously, the running backs get their credit. The quarterback's coach is typically the offensive coordinator, and the receivers coach has been really a revolving door. But you look at the bulk of the work for this year and for Penn State to get to where they're at, it's come up front. They're playing some great football. Nolan Rucci is playing very, very well. And I think for Penn State to win and survive and advance now that we're in the playoffs, they need that up front, the front seven for both offense and defense. And if they're able to get that, then there's a very good possibility they can advance beyond Arizona next week in the Fiesta Bowl, or in a couple weeks or 10 days or whatever it is now. The schedule gets weird. Yeah. And then maybe we're on South Beach in early January.
I'll have to try to join you for that one if you're on South Beach, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Before we wrap this up, going to give our final takeaways. Mine is the linebackers. Point blank, for a school that's known as Linebacker U over the past few years, it feels like because of the talent that Penn State has gotten on the defensive line and the talent has gotten in the secondary, the backers kind of get lost in the shuffle. And they had a guy that it looked like was going to follow in that great linebacker lineage, Abdul Carter. He gets moved to defensive end. Kobe King is a very solid player, but kind of goes under the radar, which most Mikes tend to do. And then the two guys who I don't know if they've been too appreciated by Penn State fans this season. DeLuca, who we talked about, Tony Rojas, who had a 59-yard pick six to make it 14-0. They really stole the show today, and it really shows how deep Penn State's defense is, because you have Abdul Carter at the front, superstar. You have Jalen Reed in the back. He's a guy that's known as a big-time player. You didn't really think too much about the linebackers, at least outside of Kobe King. But Rojas and DeLuca definitely showed that they are guys that can make big-time plays to help Penn State win what they're hoping is a national title.
Rojas went right back to his 2,000-yard rusher days when he got that ball, because he ran over 3 or 4 SMU defenders, and that was the point of the game where I thought that SMU wasn't going to be able to come back from, because that showed they had no interest in tackling him. And by that point, it's 14-0, and your offense hasn't scored a touchdown yet.
Yeah, I was kind of even confident after they missed a wide open receiver for what would have been a touchdown a few minutes into the game. At minimum, a first down. I mean, that kind of gave you a vibe this wasn't going to work out for us.
The biggest takeaway that I have outside of the linebacker play, which was phenomenal, is that they play complementary football. They played the special teams games are weird in the cold because the punts are not good. The kicking is difficult. We saw why they went for it on 4th and 1 with that barely made 40-yarder.
Yeah, that would not have been good from 46.
No, very short. But they play complementary football. When the defense was giving up a couple yards. The offense stepped up, finally found the end zone. And when you're playing complimentary football at this time of year, it's always a good thing.
Yeah, and my takeaway is kind of similar, that this was a team victory for Penn State. And I think, wow, there are some Penn State fans that are going to say maybe they'd feel even more comfortable if Howard did throw up these amazing numbers, if the offense did just pound them offensively, and you also got a great defensive effort. Winning this way, you could argue with a glass half full take, makes you even more confident in another way, because it showed they can play complementary football. It shows they can win different ways. It shows they don't have to rely on just one man. They can take advantage of opportunities. They can take advantage of the weather. It shows they belong as an overall team, which is what you're going to have to do to win a championship. And to be honest, it's been a while probably. The Penn State program is always successful, contending, winning program. But it's been a while, and you could even argue this might be the first time under James Franklin where people really are going to think and sit there and say they could legitimately win a national title. Not just get into a major bowl game, maybe be a dark horse to win the conference, maybe even have a 10-plus win year, which they've done, but to win a national championship. And that's not been done in a long time. Even the end of Paterno wasn't doing that. So to be able to legitimately say that and have that be the case when you look at the path in front of them and feel like they're probably favored in most of those matchups, certainly the matchup coming up, it's obviously about the next game. I'm sure that Franklin doesn't want to hear this. He's only worried about the next game. But that's an amazing feat for a program that was in a scenario coming into this year that if they didn't get in the playoff, there were going to be people that said, you failed, Franklin should be gone. He got in, he won a playoff game, and now maybe could win a national title. And if you do that, maybe there's a statue for Franklin as well around here, because it's been a long time, and it would be in a whole different era, arguably tougher to maybe do it now.
If they do build a statue, it'll just be him making number one finger next to a 0. But again, that mentality helps. And he mentioned that in his press conference before we.
It's not an uncommon mentality.
No.
I will admit Neil Brown,
right.
who got fired, had that same mentality.
He won't be getting any
We're not
statues.
trusting the climb.
We're not here, but my point is, that mentality's not.
But that matters
uncommon.
because he mentioned this in his press conference that a lot of coaches would say it's a 4-game season now. Well, you can't get to games 2, 3, and 4 without winning the first one.
100%.
Penn State is now 1-0 in the playoffs. They are now one of 8 teams left to go. And obviously 100%. We'll still figure out Clemson and Texas at the time of this recording, and then obviously Tennessee and Ohio State. But they are against Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. They know that they are in that game. That's the next one. Obviously, you've got Georgia and Notre Dame on the other side of that bracket. Could there be a matchup between Notre Dame and Georgia against Penn State or Boise State? We're going to find that out.
I don't think anybody is saying, though, that Penn State can't beat any of these teams that would be in front of them. Because in past years, even when Penn State had a 10-win year, even when you went to the Rose Bowl to cover them, the commentary was 10-win years great program. In terms of the elite program, there's the elite, there's the marquee, they're a step below. They can beat everybody else. They can beat the West Virginias, but they can't beat the Ohio States at the time. They can't beat the Michigans at the time. They can't be that next level program. They couldn't beat the Georgias in front of them, teams
big
that
knock
would
now.
play now. But I think Penn State's probably sitting there saying, maybe that was the case then, but now we can budge into that tier and we can beat them. And even if you don't win a national title, if you win another playoff game or you win 2 more playoff games or you get there, then they're going to really be able to say, no, we're in that higher tier and it's going to happen soon.
And of course the big knock now is that they played SMU. Out of the ACC.
And you're going to have Boise
and you're
going to
get Boise State, which is Group of 5, Mountain West.
That. Sure.
Future Pac-12, though.
And even if they play Georgia, they'll say, well, you beat them without
Well, Pac-12's not power yet.
So,
Yeah,
sure.
right.
Sure.
It's a little weaker Pac-12.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. There's always going to be that knocking against James Franklin. It's a winning game. Obviously, a top 25 matchup, top 10, depending on whether you look at senior
you win
ranking.
it this way, and SMU
It's a
is
pretty
now a
convincing
power
win.
program.
Yeah.
They're not a Group of 5, even though they were. If they're in the ACC, this, even if he loses to Boise State, this is a playoff win against a power program. Doesn't excuse a possible loss to a Group of 5, but it's a special year for Boise State as well. It's not like they're a slouch. But he has a power win. SMU had the death penalty. They were a recent Group of 5. They were irrelevant for 30 years. They would tell you that. I sat in their presser, and they were saying that this is a new era from SMU. But this year, they're a power program. So it would count as a win over power program. But yeah, probably to really shut everybody up, he's going to need to beat Boise State and then win one.
Getting to the national title game shuts everybody up.
Getting there would shut it up, and obviously winning will be a cherry on top of the Sunday. We'll see what happens.
Yep. If Penn State does beat Boise State, which FanDuel's early spread is, I think, 10.5 points, if I saw that right.
Okay.
So
wow.
That's pretty.
I feel like that's some bulletin board material right there.
And I think the other thing there is, right, we look at Indiana, And I know we talked about this before, but we looked at Indiana and we looked at SMU, the two teams that really, you look at it and the SEC
Maybe
pundits,
they shouldn't be in.
They
right,
make that
right.
argument, right?
Right. Who'd they beat
So you look at the group of 4, Boise State gets that bye, but they're going to go up against a Boise State team that's hungry. And
Boise can make their statement too, because obviously they want to win, but if they have a better showing than SMU, that's already making a statement that we at least belong here. If they lose by 40, then people are going to say, did you really deserve the bye, and you only got in because of other, Big 12 was maybe
Ashton
down.
Genty's going to run hungry because I think he feels slighted because he lost the Heisman.
I'm sure he does.
And Spencer Danielson, I think, as head coach, chips on the shoulder. Now you got to stick up for the guy, the group of 4 guys. Hey,
a 10.5 is a chip on the shoulder, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think Franklin's probably loving that spread because that is going to be brought up now. Probably
for the
not.
next 10 days.
Yeah, and that'll be a little annoying, because
Oh.
that's some pressure. You win that by 3, you don't count as a win, but they're gonna, and also obviously the opponent in Boise State's gonna sit there and say that's disrespectful, 10.5 point underdog. That type of spread, if anyone knows spreads, that's saying there's not even a chance.
And that's against a team that had a bye.
Right. I mean that's telling you there's not even a chance. And we'll also find out here in this first run of the playoff, and then we'll let our camera guy have a break with his hands here, that maybe a bye, maybe being hot, maybe playing, maybe the 10-day layoff after winning is not even, maybe that's not even fair to Penn State. Maybe we should get a little tighter. I know they like having the New Year's Eve and New Year's Day type of thing eventually, but generally in postseasons of all of the sports, you win, you advance, the next week, the next couple days, you have another game. This is a long layoff, and Boise State will have been off for 20-plus days. That is a very long time. We've seen in sports history, even if they're a better team, Boise State is the underdog here, lose when they have a longer layoff. Practice, scrimmages are not going to simulate what Penn State just experienced here for them. So we'll see if that's a thing, and if Penn State maybe would lose, I'm sure there'd be commentary on, is a 10-day layoff even fair to a winner that had to play, that when a group of 5 is the one with the bye and they're in a major conference, they didn't win it. All of this is going to be discussed forever as we're figuring out the playoff here, but Penn State can shut all of this up, as we said before, by winning, getting it minimum to the national title game. That would shut pretty much everybody up if you do that, even if you don't win the national title, because at that point, even if you don't win, you're losing to a team that is in that elite status, most likely, unless there's craziness. And even then, getting there is something. But this is an historic, special year for Penn State. Doesn't mean it's the best year in Penn State football history, but this is an historic, special year for Penn State. And because of what's in front of them, because it is the playoff, because the historic nature of this, even if you lose to Boise State, you can argue it's even more important than that Rose Bowl win. I mean, this allows you to really legitimize yourself as a national contender, whereas when you win that Rose Bowl, people were still saying you're a second tier in terms of the elite status. One more win, it's certainly more, I think, quiets that noise at least.
Yeah. For Penn State, real quick, Joe, before you get us out of here, I'm going to paraphrase or just kind of reword the quote by Dory from Finding Nemo. Okay. Just keep winning. And that's what Penn State needs to do. And as long as they keep doing that, obviously the season continues. But today was a perfect example of what they're capable of doing. Even when the offense doesn't click, the defense picked up the bulk of the work. And then they obviously trounced SMU 38-10. And it probably could have been even worse, to be honest with you.
Yep.
100%.
Well, if Penn State does beat Boise State, it will set a program record for wins at 13, which people are going to say, well, Paterno's teams didn't
There'll be an
get to
asterisk
play
on
15
it.
games,
There will be,
but
yeah.
it would still be a big accomplishment, and we'll just have to see. Before we'll get into Boise State 20 over the next 10 days, but over...
This is going to be a lot of fun for me.
Yeah. Over the rest of Saturday and even into Sunday, we'll still be writing about the SMU game on myself and Jarrod from Nittany Sports Now. Mike, you're actually a credential for Yardbarker, so
correct. Yes,
you can find
doing some
yourself
national coverage over there. Yeah.
And at Nittany Sports Now is our Twitter handle. Site's name Nittany Sports Now. I'm at Joe Smeltzer 775. He's J Prugar 26. You're
Mike Asti 11. Yes, on
All right.
social.
Final from Beaver Stadium. Penn State 38. SMU 10.